Clark Miller's hands trembled as he stared at the credit card statement, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. 40 years of marriage, and now this. Restaurant charges on evenings Marion claimed to be with her sister. Jewelry purchases he never saw. His den, once a sanctuary of order and accomplishment, suddenly felt foreign. The sandalwood scent from his grandfather's desk mingled with the saltiness of tears he refused to acknowledge. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone who knows your every weakness? Share below if your heart recognizes this pain. Like if you've stood where Clark stands, follow to witness how he reclaims his dignity. Outside, rain tapped against windows where grandchildren's handprints had once been preserved, now wiped clean like so many promises. His fingers grazed a family photo, throat tightening as he wondered how many lies had been served alongside Sunday dinners. The antique clock ticked, marking seconds between the life he thought he had and the truth he now faced. Clark Miller's hands trembled as he stared at the credit card statement, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. The den, once his sanctuary of order and accomplishment, suddenly felt foreign. 40 years of carefully balanced books, and now this. Restaurant charges on evenings Marion claimed to be with her sister, jewelry purchases he never saw. His finger traced the unfamiliar establishment name, memory flashing to Marion's casual mention of just lunch with Beth. The antique wall clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking time between the life he thought he had and whatever this was becoming. The sandalwood scent from his grandfather's desk mingled with the faint aroma of morning coffee, now gone cold in the cup beside him. A single tear formed, hovering before dropping onto the paper. He quickly dabbed it away with his monogrammed handkerchief, a Christmas gift from grandchildren whose college funds he'd so carefully managed. Not possible. Not Marion. But the evidence lay before him, black and white, except for that telltale drop mark now blurring the highest charge. The leather chair creaked as he shifted, checking their joint account online. The pattern emerged like a mechanical failure he'd once diagnosed, systematic withdrawals coinciding with her appointments. His chest tightened, that first tear now joined by another he didn't bother wiping away. On the bookshelf, their 40th anniversary photo watched him, Marion's smile reaching her eyes in a way it hadn't lately. When had that changed? The same hands that had built their retirement portfolio, fixed their grandchildren's bicycles, and held Marion through her mother's passing now felt useless against this invisible fracture. Clark removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as a sob caught in his throat. Headlights swept across the window. Clark straightened, quickly slipping the statement into his desk drawer. The retirement advisor who'd guided countless clients through financial crises now faced his own. His reflection in the darkened computer screen showed a composed man, only the redness around his eyes betraying the turmoil within. He heard the garage door opening, Marion's car pulling in. His finger hesitated over the mouse, closing the account history. The smudge on the screen caught his attention. Marion's fingerprint where she'd been checking accounts he thought only he accessed. Clark's jaw tightened. The financial advisor's precision now shifting to something else, methodical observation. He would watch, wait, document. A soft knock at the den door. "Clark, dinner in 10 minutes. Beth says hello." Another lie to add to his growing collection. Clark rose earlier than usual, the night's restless thoughts propelling him from bed before dawn. Marion slept soundly, her breathing deep and even, the sleep of someone unburdened. He paused in the doorway, studying his wife's face for any sign of the deception he'd discovered. 40 years of waking beside her, and now he searched for a stranger. The kitchen welcomed him with familiar creaks. He prepared coffee in the old percolator Marion had tried to replace last Christmas with some fancy contraption. "No need for new when this works just fine," he'd told her. Now he wondered if that was just one more thing she found tiresome about him. The rich aroma filled the room as morning light crept through new curtains Marian had purchased without discussion last month, despite their agreement to consult on expenses over $100. Getting careless, ain't she? Clark winced at his own bitter thought as he poured coffee, the slight tremor in his hand betraying emotions his face wouldn't show. The shower started upstairs. Clark hesitated only briefly before moving to the counter where Marian had left her phone plugged in overnight. His fingers, once steady when balancing decades of family finances, now felt clumsy with guilt as he picked it up. The passcode, their anniversary date, still worked. Small mercy. Messages appeared, the name Victor repeated several times. Clark's throat tightened as he scrolled through conversations filled with intimate language and meeting arrangements. Scheduled for today. Lunch, 1 p.m. Giovanni's. Marian had mentioned a volunteer committee meeting. Clark heard the shower stop. With mechanic's precision, he took photos of several messages with his rarely used smartphone before replacing Marian's phone exactly as he'd found it. By the time she entered the kitchen, he was reading yesterday's newspaper, cup half empty. "You're up early?" Marian said, her tone casual as she poured coffee. "Thought I'd get a jump on the day." Clark observed her over his reading glasses. "How's your sister doing? Thought I might stop by next week to fix that cabinet she mentioned." Marian's hand paused imperceptibly before continuing to stir sweetener. "Oh, she's fine. But don't bother with the cabinet. She had someone look at it already." The lie hung between them like exhaust in a closed garage. Clark nodded, pretending to return to his paper while noting her elaborate makeup application, more than her usual volunteer meeting warranted. When Marian left, Clark retreated to their garden, kneeling among rose bushes he'd tended for 20 years. Here, with only birds as witnesses, he allowed himself one audible sob, quickly muffled against his sleeve as the neighbor's sprinkler system hummed to life. The decision formed as he deadheaded spent blooms with methodical snips. He would follow her today. The financial advisor who'd built retirement plans based on verifiable data needed more evidence before confronting this new reality. 30 minutes later, Clark sat in his sensibly maintained sedan, watching Marian enter Giovanni's. Through the restaurant window, he observed a well-dressed younger man rise to greet her, not with a professional handshake, but with a kiss to her cheek that lingered too long. His hand rested possessively at the small of her back as he guided her to their table. No volunteer committee meeting, just another lie to add to his growing collection. Clark spent the afternoon in meticulous organization, spreading financial documents across his desk like a general planning a campaign. Each paper represented a piece of their shared life: mortgage statements for the home they'd saved 20 years to buy, insurance policies protecting their future, retirement accounts he'd carefully managed through market ups and downs. His fingers, steady once more, sorted them by importance, creating a complete picture of assets Marian might not even realize they had. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 4 times. Marian should have returned from her committee meeting hours ago. Clark straightened his papers, tucked the most essential documents into his leather briefcase, the one Linda had given him when he retired, and secured the rest in his filing cabinet. A walk would clear his head. Without conscious decision, his feet carried him the 6 blocks to Thomas Warren's modest home. They'd worked together before retirement, shared fishing trips and poker nights, stood as each other's best man decades ago. Thomas answered the door in his usual direct manner, marine posture never quite leaving him. "You look like hell, Clark." "Need some advice, Thomas. Got a few minutes?" 20 minutes and 1 cup of black coffee later, Clark had outlined the situation without emotional embellishment. Thomas listened with the focused attention of a man who'd learned in combat that details matter. "My guest room's yours if you need it. Converted the garage too. Has its own entrance." "Appreciate that. Might take you up on it." By the time Clark returned home, evening had settled around the neighborhood. He prepared dinner from habit, pot roast, Marion's favorite, and set the table for two. As darkness deepened, he ate alone, his portion growing cold as Marion's remained untouched. The silent house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Headlights swept across the living room windows at 9:37 p.m. Clark heard laughter. Marion's familiar cadence mingled with a deeper male voice. He remained seated at the dining table, napkin still tucked neatly beside his plate, as the front door opened. Marion froze in the entryway, arm linked with a man Clark had never met. Tall, perhaps mid-50s, with an expensive watch and cologne Clark could smell from across the room. "Clark, I didn't expect you to wait up." Marion's voice carried forced brightness, her eyes darting between Clark and the stranger. "Clearly." Clark's voice emerged calmer than he felt. Marion straightened, something defiant replacing her initial shock. "This is Victor Lawson. Victor, my husband Clark." Her emphasis on husband carried an almost dismissive tone. Victor nodded without extending his hand. "Marion's told me about you." "Interesting. She hasn't mentioned you." Clark observed how Victor's gaze moved around the room, assessing the furniture, the artwork, calculating value rather than admiring a home. Marion's chin lifted. "Clark, Victor and I have been seeing each other. I want you to understand that things have changed. You can either adjust to our new arrangement or—" Her pause carried the weight of her ultimatum. "Or you'll need to find somewhere else to live." Victor smiled slightly. "This house has excellent potential. Too much space for just two people, really." The final piece clicked into place. Clark rose from the table with deliberate calm, studying Marion's face, searching for any remnant of the woman he'd built a life with. He found only a stranger wearing his wife's features. Without a word, Clark walked to his study, gathering his briefcase. He returned to find them still standing in the entryway, Marion's expression now uncertain at his silence. Clark placed his house key on the table beside the cold pot roast. His wedding band followed after a moment's hesitation. The single tear that tracked down his cheek was the only outward sign of 4 decades crumbling around him. He walked past them and through the front door without looking back. Behind him, he heard Marion's confused whisper, "Why isn't he arguing?" She would learn soon enough. Thomas's converted garage apartment was Spartan but meticulously clean, reflecting its owner's military background. Clark unpacked his single suitcase, arranging the few belongings he'd brought with the same precision that had organized his financial files for decades. Shirts hung exactly 1 inch apart, toiletries aligned on the bathroom shelf. The briefcase containing essential documents centered perfectly on the folding table that would become his command center. "Coffee's ready when you are." Thomas stood in the doorway, offering not sympathy but practical support. Clark appreciated the difference. "Thanks. I'll be out in a minute." They sat at Thomas's kitchen table, mugs steaming between them. Clark explained the full situation, not just Marion's affair, but the years of financial support he'd provided while she claimed to volunteer, the suspicious charges, her sudden demand that he leave their home. Thomas listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing until Clark finished. "She doesn't know you've got copies of everything, does she?" "No. And she has no idea I've been tracking the irregular spending patterns." Thomas nodded. "Good. Element of surprise matters in any campaign." Clark returned to the apartment and opened his laptop. With methodical efficiency, he created a spreadsheet documenting all shared accounts, loans, credit cards, and insurance policies. Each entry included account numbers, balances, payment dates, and Marion's level of access. The financial advisor who'd guided countless clients through retirement planning now applied those same skills to his own crisis. His first call was to their mortgage company. "I need to remove my automatic payments for account number 4572813. Property at 1742 Oakwood Lane. Similar calls followed. Insurance companies, credit card issuers, utility services, not canceling accounts, just removing his automatic payments. Let Marion discover the consequences when bills came due. By afternoon, Clark had worked through most of his list when a particular credit card statement caught his attention. Charges from several casinos appeared over the past 6 months. Marion had never mentioned gambling. Digging deeper, he discovered cash advances, high-interest loans, and, most disturbing, loan applications bearing what appeared to be his signature. Thomas. Clark's voice cracked slightly as his friend entered with fresh coffee. She forged my signature. Thomas placed a steady hand on Clark's shoulder, the gesture conveying understanding no words could match. Document everything. We'll need a lawyer. That evening, as they watched the local news, a segment about identity theft targeting seniors captured their attention. The reporter described how scammers often exploited existing relationships, mentioning romance scams where new companions gained access to victims' finances. Marion didn't even let me meet this victor until yesterday, Clark said, turning to his computer. I want to know who he is. A simple search revealed disturbing patterns. Victor Lawson had multiple fraud complaints filed against him in neighboring counties. No convictions, he was careful, but the pattern was clear. Clark saved screenshots, adding them to his growing evidence file. The phone rang just as Clark was organizing his findings. An unfamiliar number, but he answered, Mr. Miller, this is Heartland Credit Services. We're calling about delinquent payments on your premium line of credit. I don't have an account with your company. Sir, we have applications with your signature dated 3 months ago. The account is under Marion Miller with you as co-signer. Clark's hand tightened on the phone. I'll need copies of those applications. I believe my signature was forged. After hanging up, Clark sat in silence, the magnitude of betrayal expanding beyond emotional infidelity to criminal exploitation. For the first time since discovering Marion's affair, he allowed his control to crack. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, hands covering his face. Thomas said nothing, simply sitting nearby until Clark composed himself. When Clark finally looked up, Thomas recognized the expression. He'd seen it on fellow Marines when determination replaced shock. I built our retirement security over 40 years, Clark said, voice steady despite reddened eyes. I'm not letting them dismantle it in months. So what's the plan, old friend? First, evidence, then consequences. Clark turned back to his computer, determination replacing despair with each keystroke. The financial advisor who'd protected clients from poor decisions would now protect himself from outright fraud. On screen, another identity theft victim described the shame of being exploited. Clark nodded in recognition, but unlike that victim, he had the skills to fight back, and unlike Marion and Victor, he had nothing left to lose. Clark's phone rang early Tuesday morning, displaying Linda's number. His daughter rarely called before work. Something was wrong. He answered with trepidation. Dad? What's going on? Mom says you walked out on her. Clark closed his eyes briefly, pressing fingers to his temple. It's more complicated than that, Linda. She's devastated. Said you just abandoned her without warning, that you've been acting strange for weeks. Dad, what were you thinking? The accusation in his daughter's voice cut deeper than any of Marion's deceptions. He'd coached Linda's softball teams, helped with science projects, walked her down the aisle, yet Marion had somehow convinced her that he was the villain. Can we meet? There are things you need to know. Fine. Coffee shop on Main. Noon. Clark arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a corner table with his evidence folder neatly arranged. Through the window, he watched young couples and families enjoying the spring day, their ordinary happiness now feeling like a scene from someone else's life. The coffee shop bustled with cheerful energy that only emphasized his isolation. Linda arrived 10 minutes late, her crossed arms and tight expression making clear this wasn't a social visit.
She'd always looked more like Marion, same determined chin, same expressive eyes now narrowed with suspicion.
You look terrible, Dad. Been a difficult few days. Clark pushed a coffee toward her, already prepared the way she liked. I need to explain what's happening. Mom already told me. You've been paranoid, checking her phone, questioning her friends. She said you've been withdrawing, barely talking to her for weeks. Clark's hand tightened around his cup. Marion had weaponized his silence, spinning his observation period into evidence of instability. Masterful manipulation. Linda, your mother has been having an affair. I found evidence weeks ago, but wanted to be certain before confronting her. That's ridiculous. Mom would never. She brought him to our house Sunday night, told me to either accept their arrangement or leave. Linda's expression wavered slightly, but hardened again. She said you might make accusations, that you've been imagining things, creating problems where there aren't any. Clark opened his evidence folder. I have proof. Credit card statements showing restaurant charges when she claimed to be elsewhere, text messages with this man, Victor, casino visits she never mentioned. Linda glanced at the papers without really seeing them. Mom says you're having some kind of breakdown. She's worried about you, Dad. Says retirement has been harder on you than anyone realized. Linda, please look at these documents. Clark's voice cracked slightly. Your mother's companion has a history of targeting older women. There are loans in my name I never signed for. So now Mom's not just cheating, but committing fraud. Do you hear yourself? Linda checked her watch. I think you should see someone, Dad, a therapist. Mom found one who specializes in adjustment issues for retirees. The final piece clicked into place. Marion had been systematically undermining him, preparing their daughter for this moment, ensuring her story would be believed over his. Your mother forged my signature on loan applications. That's criminal, Linda. I need to get back to work. Linda stood abruptly. Mom's worried sick about you. Please call her dad. Get help. Linda, wait. Clark reached for her arm, accidentally knocking the folder. Papers scattered, some sliding to the floor. This isn't you, Dad. Linda's eyes filled with tears. The father I know wouldn't make up stories about Mom. Wouldn't abandon his family without warning. She walked out, the bell above the door marking her departure with cheerful incongruence. Clark knelt to gather the fallen documents, aware of curious glances from nearby tables. His hands shook as he collected papers now stained with spilled coffee. Outside, rain began falling, a few drops at first, then a steady downpour that matched his darkening mood. By the time he reached his car, the evidence folder was partially soaked. He sat behind the wheel, rain streaming down windows as he finally allowed himself to break. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, his body shaking with the force of grief, not just for Marion's betrayal, but for Linda's rejection, for the family that now viewed him as unstable and paranoid. The drive back to Thomas's was a blur. Clark entered the empty apartment, spreading water-damaged papers across the floor in a desperate attempt to salvage his evidence. The key financial document showing forged signatures was ruined, ink bleeding across the page, rendering it useless. Alone in the silent apartment, rain pounding the metal roof, Clark Miller, the man who had built a reputation on steady reliability, finally shattered. Decades of controlled emotions broke free as he slid to the floor beside his ruined evidence, head in hands, shoulders heaving with unrestrained sobs. For the first time in his adult life, Clark had no plan, no strategy, no clear path forward. The financial advisor who never lost control now sat surrounded by soggy papers and broken trust, utterly alone with his despair. Has family betrayal left you sobbing alone like Clark? Share your heartache below, like if you've felt this abandoned, follow to see if he can rebuild these shattered bonds. Clark woke to voices in the main house.
Thomas's deep rumble mingled with an unfamiliar tone, strained, anxious. He glanced at his watch. 7:30 a.m. He'd slept in the chair, surrounded by now-dried papers, stiff neck a small punishment for yesterday's breakdown. A knock at the door. "Clark, got someone here you should meet." Thomas entered with a man about their age, weathered face, military straight posture despite obvious tension around his eyes. "This is James Cooper, Vietnam, like us. Got himself in a situation you might understand." Clark straightened, gathering scattered papers with quick efficiency. "Come in, Mr. Cooper." Just James. The man remained standing, pride evident in his reluctance to sit. "Thomas says you know about financial matters." "I was an advisor for 30 years before retiring." James nodded, hands fidgeting with a folder he carried. "Got this loan last year. Home equity thing for my granddaughter's medical bills. Payments suddenly doubled last month. They're saying I signed papers agreeing to variable rates, but I don't remember that part." Despite his own crisis, Clark's professional instincts engaged. "May I see the documents?" James hesitated, then handed over the folder. Clark adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the papers with practiced efficiency. The structure looked immediately familiar, similar to loan documents he'd found with Marion's things. "Who arranged this loan for you, James?" "Financial service company. Friendly fella came to the house after my wife saw their ad. Said they specialized in helping veterans." Clark continued reading, expertise flowing back as he identified problematic clauses. "This section here, it allows them to adjust rates quarterly without notification. And this writer..." He looked up. "Did you initial this page?" James leaned closer. "Don't recall seeing that before. It gives them collateral rights beyond your home equity. Essentially, they could claim other assets if you default." Thomas brought coffee as Clark explained the predatory structure, James's expression shifting from confusion to anger. For the first time since Linda walked out of the coffee shop, Clark felt something besides despair, a sense of purpose, of using his knowledge to help someone else. "Can anything be done?" James asked. "Yes." Clark's voice carried newfound confidence. "There are regulatory protections against this type of lending, especially for veterans. I can help you draft a complaint to the proper authorities." James straightened, pride warring with need. "Don't want charity. Not charity." Clark met his eyes directly. "I'd be helping myself too. Working through a problem like this. I need that right now." Something passed between them, understanding beyond words. James nodded once, accepting. For the next 2 hours, Clark meticulously documented the loan's questionable features, explaining each point to James in clear terms. As he worked, he felt steadier, more focused than he had in days. When James thanked him before leaving, promising to return with additional documents, Clark realized he'd smiled for the first time since discovering Marion's betrayal. "That's the Clark Miller I know," Thomas observed after James departed, "using that financial brain for good. His loan has the same structure as some documents I found with Marion's things." Clark straightened papers with renewed energy. "I need to recheck something." Returning to his apartment, Clark reorganized his investigation, finding backup copies of documents the rain had ruined. With fresh purpose, he reviewed James's loan against patterns he'd observed in Marion's finances. The connection emerged like dawn breaking through clouds. The company issuing James's predatory loan listed a financial advisor, Victor Lawson. Clark's hand steadied completely as he logged into public records databases he'd used throughout his career. Victor Lawson appeared in multiple consumer complaints across 3 counties, specializing in loans targeting older homeowners, particularly those with significant equity. The picture clarified with each new piece of information. Victor wasn't just Marion's lover. He was a practiced predator with a documented pattern of financial exploitation. The gambling charges suddenly made more sense.
Not just Marion's secret vice, but possibly how Victor had gained emotional leverage over her. Clark printed his findings, creating fresh documentation of the broader scheme. The same skills that had made him an effective financial advisor now fueled his investigation. Patterns emerged, connections formed, and with them, a strategy. Standing before the bathroom mirror that evening, Clark hardly recognized himself. Just 24 hours ago, he'd been broken by Linda's rejection, sobbing alone, surrounded by ruined evidence. Now his reflection showed something different. Purpose replacing despair, determination overriding grief. The financial advisor who'd helped countless clients navigate complex situations had found his footing again. Marion and Victor had chosen their target poorly. They thought they were exploiting a vulnerable retiree, easy prey for their scheme. They would soon discover their mistake. Clark returned to his desk, methodically preparing documentation for a meeting with the lawyer Thomas had recommended. Tomorrow would bring a new phase in this unexpected battle, not just for his financial security, but for James, and who knew how many others caught in Victor's predatory web. For the first time since walking out of his home, Clark slept soundly, untroubled by dreams. The path forward was clear now, illuminated by renewed purpose and the satisfaction of using his expertise to help others while helping himself. The broken man from yesterday had begun rebuilding, stronger for having been shattered. The law office of Patricia Hammond occupied the second floor of a well-maintained Victorian on the edge of downtown. Clark arrived 10 minutes early, briefcase containing meticulously organized evidence. Thomas had recommended Patricia with typical directness. "Doesn't waste words or your money. Best lawyer I know." The reception area reflected its owner's reputation, professional without pretension. Clark stood straighter as he announced himself, adjusting his tie, the first he'd worn since discovering Marion's betrayal. Patricia Hammond matched her office, efficient, direct, and formidable despite her compact frame. Silver hair cut in a practical bob, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed Clark's evidence with practiced scrutiny. "You've done exceptionally thorough work here, Mr. Miller." Professional habit. Clark sat with hands resting on knees, waiting as she examined loan applications bearing his forged signature. "These forgeries are quite good, but they won't withstand expert examination." She set aside one document. "And you never authorized these accounts?" "Never. I only discovered them after leaving our home." Patricia nodded, continuing through the file until reaching the materials about Victor Lawson. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "This is interesting, Mr. Lawson appears in several cases I'm familiar with, though he's managed to avoid direct liability. He targets older individuals with significant home equity," Clark explained. "I've documented his connection to at least 5 similar situations, including a fellow veteran." "This changes the complexity of your case," Patricia said, removing her glasses. "We're not just dealing with marital discord and unauthorized accounts. This appears to be part of a larger pattern of elder financial exploitation. When betrayal shatters trust, should you fight back like Clark or walk away? Comment your choice, like if you're standing for justice, follow for the courtroom confrontation that changes everything." Clark felt a weight lifting as Patricia outlined their strategy: restraining orders to protect his assets, formal fraud reports, and potential criminal charges against both Marion and Victor. "We'll file these immediately. The court date will likely be within 2 weeks." Patricia handed him documents requiring signature. "Your signature, your real one, will be our first piece of evidence." Clark removed his father's fountain pen from his breast pocket. His hand, steady once more, signed with the same confident strokes that had finalized thousands of financial documents throughout his career. As he capped the pen, he noticed the date on Patricia's calendar. "May 15th, he said softly. "Is that date significant?" 30 years ago today, my father won his case against a business partner who tried to defraud him." Clark returned the pen to his pocket. "He always said the truth has staying power."
Patricia nodded with understanding. Like father, like son, it seems. As Clark gathered his paperwork, his phone rang, Linda's number appearing on screen. His heart raced as he answered. Dad? Her voice sounded different, hesitant, uncertain. I found something you need to see. What is it, Linda? Letters in Mom's desk, about loans and gambling debts. And there's a journal. Her voice cracked slightly. Dad, I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. A single tear formed as Clark closed his eyes briefly, composing himself before responding. It's all right, Linda. We'll figure this out together. Can we meet? Tonight? Of course. Thomas's place at 7? After ending the call, Clark looked up to find Patricia watching him with understanding. Family reconciliation? My daughter found evidence confirming what I've been telling her. That will strengthen our case considerably. Patricia stood, extending her hand. Mr. Miller, based on your preparation and these developments, I'm quite confident about our position. Clark exited the building into spring sunshine that seemed brighter than it had in weeks. The validation of his claims by both a legal professional and now his daughter brought tears of relief. He quickly blinked away. The path forward was clearer with each step. That evening, he prepared Thomas's kitchen table for Linda's visit, arranging chairs, setting out water glasses, checking his watch, his father's watch, retrieved from his safe deposit box that afternoon, the same watch his father had worn to court 30 years ago. Clark touched the timepiece, feeling a circle closing, father to son, justice to justice. His father had stood against deception with quiet dignity decades ago. Now Clark would do the same, carrying forward that legacy of integrity. When the doorbell rang, Clark straightened his shoulders and moved to answer it. Linda stood on the porch, holding a folder similar to his own, eyes red-rimmed but determined. Without words, she stepped forward into his embrace, the folder pressed between them as she whispered against his shoulder. I should have believed you, Dad. You believe me now. That's what matters. Together they walked into the house, father and daughter united again, ready to face the truth together, no matter how painful it might be. The final pieces were falling into place for the confrontation ahead, justice drawing nearer with each passing hour. The broken trust between them had begun healing. Now it was time to address the greater betrayal that had fractured their family. Clark arrived at the courthouse flanked by Thomas and Linda, their presence lending physical manifestation to the support he'd lacked weeks earlier. He carried his evidence in a leather portfolio Linda had brought him, for good luck, Dad, his father's watch securely fastened around his wrist. The hallway's marble floors echoed with their footsteps as they approached Courtroom C. Patricia Hammond waited outside, professional in a navy suit, nodding approval at their punctual arrival. They're already inside, she said quietly. Mrs. Miller and Mr. Lawson, with counsel. Clark's stomach tightened despite his preparation. Seeing Marion again, now across a courtroom rather than across their dinner table, would test his composure. Linda squeezed his arm, sensing his tension. I'm right here, Dad. They entered together, the courtroom's hushed atmosphere wrapping around them. Clark spotted Marion immediately, seated beside a younger man in an expensive suit, her attorney. Victor sat behind them, exuding confidence that faltered visibly when he noticed Clark's organized evidence files. Marion's eyes met Clark's briefly before darting away. She looked smaller somehow, less certain than the woman who had delivered her ultimatum in their living room weeks ago. Judge Helen Simmons entered, her no-nonsense reputation preceding her. After preliminary introductions, Patricia presented their case with clinical precision, outlining the forged signatures, unauthorized accounts, and pattern of financial exploitation. Your Honor, this is not merely a domestic dispute. Mr. Miller has documented evidence suggesting his wife's companion, Mr. Lawson, has engaged in a pattern of elder financial exploitation across multiple counties. The judge's gaze sharpened. That's a serious allegation, counselor, with serious evidence to support it. Patricia submitted Clark's documentation, including James Cooper's case and 3 others with striking similarities. When Clark's turn came to testify, he approached the witness stand with steady steps. After being sworn in, he answered Patricia's questions with calm clarity, explaining how he discovered the discrepancies, his professional background that helped him recognize the pattern, and the confrontation that led to his departure. And you maintain you never signed these loan documents? I did not, Your Honor. The signatures are forgeries. Marion's attorney cross-examined him, suggesting emotional instability following retirement, paranoia, controlling behavior. Clark met each accusation with composed denial, directing answers to the judge rather than engaging in emotional exchanges. The turning point came when Judge Simmons began questioning Victor directly. Mr. Lawson, these complaints from Essex and Maplewood counties describe remarkably similar circumstances to what we're seeing here. Care to explain? Victor shifted uncomfortably. Those were misunderstandings, Your Honor. Disgruntled clients who didn't read their paperwork properly. 5 misunderstandings with identical patterns? The judge adjusted her reading glasses. And now we have loan applications with Mr. Miller's forged signature after you became involved with Mrs. Miller. Clark watched Marion's face as realization dawned. The same pattern he'd recognized in James's loan documents was repeating in her own life. Her expression shifted from defensive to confused, eyes darting between Victor and the evidence binders. Judge Simmons reviewed the final documents before looking up. The court finds substantial evidence of financial fraud and identity theft. I'm issuing immediate restraining orders preventing Mrs. Miller and Mr. Lawson from accessing any of Mr. Miller's accounts or properties. The gavel's decisive crack echoed through the courtroom. Furthermore, I'm referring these forgery allegations to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Mr. Lawson, given your pattern of similar complaints, I suggest you retain criminal counsel. Victor's confident facade crumbled entirely. Marion sat frozen, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. As people began gathering their things, Clark felt a complex wave of emotions, vindication mixed with a surprising compassion. Marion looked stunned, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Had she been Victor's victim as well as his accomplice? Outside the courtroom, Linda hugged him tightly. You did it, Dad. You stood up for yourself. We did it, Clark corrected gently. Your evidence made the difference. Thomas clapped his shoulder with quiet pride. Justice served. As they prepared to leave, Clark noticed Marion standing alone, Victor having disappeared immediately after the ruling. Their eyes met across the hallway, 40 years of shared history hanging between them. Without thinking, Clark gave her a small, acknowledging nod before turning away. Mr. Miller. He turned back. Marion stood closer now, her composure fragile but holding. Could we talk? Not now, but sometime? Clark studied the face he'd woken beside for 4 decades, seeing both the woman he'd married and the stranger she'd become. Perhaps, but not today. As they walked into the sunshine outside the courthouse, Clark felt the weight of weeks lifting from his shoulders. The financial advisor who'd built security for others had protected himself when it mattered most. The husband who'd been betrayed had maintained his dignity throughout. The father who'd been doubted had been vindicated in his daughter's eyes. Justice, like his father had said, had staying power. Coffee? Thomas suggested. Seems like an occasion worth marking. Clark checked his father's watch, nodding with the first genuine smile in weeks. I'd like that. Together, they descended the courthouse steps into the next chapter of a life Clark was reclaiming, one careful step at a time. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Clark stood before a whiteboard at the Veterans Community Center, explaining predatory lending practices to a room of attentive faces. His expertise, honed through decades as a financial advisor, now served a new purpose: protecting fellow veterans from the exploitation he'd narrowly escaped. The key is understanding what you're signing, he emphasized, pointing to example documents projected on the screen. These clauses here, buried in legal language, are where they hide the traps. James Cooper sat in the front row, nodding along. His case had been successfully resolved with Clark's help, the predatory loan restructured under court supervision. Behind him, a dozen other veterans and their spouses took careful notes. Word had spread quickly about Clark's workshop after James shared his story. "Any questions before we wrap up?" Clark asked, capping his marker. Hands raised around the room. For the next 20 minutes, Clark addressed specific concerns, his answers clear and patient. This was familiar territory, translating complex financial jargon into practical advice. But the personal connection made it more meaningful than his corporate advising days. As the attendees filed out, Thomas approached with coffee. "Full house today. You're making a difference, Clark." "Feels good. Different than before." Clark accepted the cup gratefully. "These folks need the information." Thomas nodded, then hesitated. "Mail came for you. From Marion." Clark's hand paused briefly before taking the envelope. Her familiar handwriting brought a complex wave of emotions, not the sharp pain of early betrayal, but something more nuanced. "Thanks." Later, alone in the converted garage apartment he'd made surprisingly comfortable, Clark sat in the evening light with Marion's letter unopened before him. The space reflected his new life, modest but orderly, with touches of personality emerging. A small bookshelf held financial references alongside fishing magazines. Linda's family photos occupied the side table. Taking a deep breath, Clark finally opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten, 5 pages of Marion's distinctive script, occasionally blotched where tears had fallen. She explained how her casual gambling had escalated into addiction, how Victor had first appeared helpful, offering financial solutions that became increasingly controlling. She detailed her shame, her therapy sessions, her growing understanding of how she'd been both victim and perpetrator. "I don't expect forgiveness, Clark. What I did, the lies, bringing him into our home, turning Linda against you, is unforgivable. I just wanted you to know I'm facing my problems now. The gambling, the debt, all of it. The divorce papers are ready whenever you want to proceed." "I won't contest anything." Clark set the letter down, emotions too complex to name washing through him. After a moment, he retrieved his jacket and walked to nearby Riverside Park, finding the bench where he and Marion had often sat during happier times. The setting sun cast golden light across the water, autumn leaves drifting onto the path around him. Couples walked hand in hand, families pushed strollers, life continuing its steady rhythm despite personal earthquakes. Clark reread the letter, a single tear falling on Marion's signature. Not a tear of fresh grief, but of acknowledgement, of what had been lost, what had been found, and the complicated journey between. He didn't discard the letter but carefully folded it into his inside pocket. Whatever came next would be approached with the same methodical consideration he applied to everything. Marion's redemption would require actions, not just words, but he recognized the courage it took to write them. Checking his father's watch, Clark rose from the bench. Linda was bringing the grandchildren for dinner, his first time hosting them since leaving the family home. The apartment was small, but he'd prepared carefully, setting up a card table for the children with special placemats they'd made years ago. Back in his kitchen, Clark moved with purpose, preparing a simple meal that held meaning, his mother's recipe for pot roast, Linda's favorite growing up. The familiar routine of chopping vegetables and checking temperatures grounded him in the moment. A knock at the door announced their arrival. Linda entered first, followed by the children who approached with initial shyness before breaking into excited chatter upon seeing the special table he'd arranged. "They've missed you, Dad," Linda said quietly as they watched the children settle in. "I've missed them too." Clark hesitated. Your mother wrote to me. Linda nodded. She told me she would. She's trying, Dad. The therapy seems to be helping. One day at a time, Clark replied, the phrase carrying new meaning in his life. As they gathered around the table, Clark felt a sense of peace that had seemed impossible weeks earlier. The financial security he'd built over decades remained intact. His relationship with Linda had emerged stronger through crisis. He'd found new purpose helping others avoid similar exploitation. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. Marion's place in his future remained a question mark. But Clark Miller faced that uncertainty with the same steady resolve that had guided him through professional and personal storms throughout his life. When his grandson asked about the veterans he was helping, Clark shared stories of resilience and recovery that reflected his own journey without naming it. The boy's eyes widened with admiration. You're like a superhero for old people, Grandpa. Linda laughed. Dad's always been a hero. Just took some of us too long to remember it. Clark smiled, touching his father's watch briefly, a gesture that had become habit in recent weeks. Time continued its steady march forward, and he moved with it, no longer defined by betrayal, but by how he'd risen above it. The financial advisor had become a teacher. The betrayed husband had become an advocate. The doubted father had become a reconnected grandfather. Each role represented not what had been lost, but what had been found along the way. You've sat at a kitchen table like Clark's, haven't you? That moment when the papers in your hands blur through tears, when decades of trust suddenly fracture like an old oak in a storm. We've all felt that first stab of betrayal, the disbelief, the questioning, the second-guessing of your own judgment. The same hands that balanced checkbooks, fixed grandchildren's bicycles, and built a lifetime of security suddenly trembling over evidence you never wanted to find. The hardest part isn't the discovery, is it, folks? It's the silence afterward. Those nights sitting alone, wondering how many lies were served alongside Sunday dinners. How many plans were made behind your back while you worked to secure a future for two. The particular sting of having your wisdom, earned through decades of living, dismissed as paranoia or confusion. The way your own children might look at you with doubt in their eyes, having heard only one side of a story you've been living. Trust breaks. Tears fall. But you're still standing. There's a dignity in how we weather these storms in our later years. Like Clark, you've learned that breakdowns can happen in private, but rebuilding happens one methodical step at a time. That leather chair might have held your sobbing frame for a night, but it won't contain your spirit forever. The financial expertise, the mechanical know-how, the lifetime of solving problems, these skills don't vanish with betrayal. They become your compass through unfamiliar terrain. Remember this, the same wisdom that makes us targets for those who mistake age for vulnerability becomes our greatest strength in recovery. We recognize patterns others miss. We understand human nature through decades of observation. We know that dignity isn't in never falling, it's in how we rise afterward. Perhaps you've found, as Clark did, that helping others navigate similar struggles brings purpose from pain. That porch swings and evening breezes still offer comfort. That family bonds, once fractured, can heal in new configurations. That forgiveness might be possible without forgetting, and boundaries can be both firm and compassionate. The clock that marked painful seconds in your darkest hour still ticks toward brighter mornings. Your story doesn't end with betrayal. It continues through resilience. And though your heart may carry scars from battles you never expected to fight in these golden years, it also carries the quiet victory of having fought with dignity, wisdom, and an unwavering sense of self-worth that no deception could permanently diminish.